Hello, everyone. This is Realtor Linda Peltz. Today, I am back with attorney Hillary, and she's going to give us some clues on disclosures. Take it away, Hillary.
Thank you, Linda. Glad to see you again.
Good to see you. You're always a hoot.
Thank you. You too. I was looking forward to this. So today I'm going to talk about disclosures for the seller and for the buyer's protection. When you buy a home, there are disclosures about whether or not there's any problems with your property. For example, if there's, usually I would highly recommend buy title insurance. If you pass on that, you are doing yourself a disservice. You are making a mistake. They are not that expensive. I understand buying a home is not cheap. I get it.
What would a title insurance cover for them so they can correlate in their brain? Why am I buying it? What does it cover?
Title insurance tells you who owns the property, who has owned the property, and if there's a cloud on title or any easements. Say, for example, the seller, there's some tax liens, for example, on the property. You could wind up being responsible for those and they can foreclose on them. What if property taxes have not been paid? What if your neighbor, Billy Bob, hasn't, say you buy 5 acres and at the back there's all this nice grass and trees and there's a road back there and your neighbor gets to cross over it, to go do something. You need to know it's there. You need to know what's there. And I see this often driveways are a thing, for example, what if you buy a landlocked property and or yours is at the road, but there are other properties behind you are landlocked. Likely someone may be transversing your property by agreement or not to get over there. So again, neighbors can get very testy when they're told they can't do those things. So the title says, one, the owner who's selling to you has clean title. Maybe there's not clean title. Maybe Billy Bob is selling to you, but it's husband and wife and Sally Sue is not around. Where is Sally Sue? Because what is Billy Bob actually selling you? And it turns out Billy Bob's in the middle of a divorce. And
Ah,
Sally's knew nothing about this, and he forges her name. Have you seen this woman? Do you know where she is? So make sure they actually own the property. They may not own the property. Life estate, for example. Some people have a property that they're on as a life estate, and then it reverts back to a trust or it goes to heirs. And make sure they're actually on title. These scams are, again, scam alert. This is happening. There's a family in Kentucky who paid to rent a property, paid the person took off. They had no right, title, or interest to that property at all. The person who rented to them just took their money. They are doing it as residences too. Be careful. Make sure the person who is on title is. If there's a trust, make sure, hey, are there other heirs? Is anybody you need to notify here like this too? Is there anybody who needs to sign off? Do your due diligence. And this is the insurance that there isn't anything else on the property you don't know about. Once you read the title report, you may go, wait, well, you got sued a few times and they recorded judgments against your property. Are they going to come after me? And the law changes in this area. It has changed a lot. It's evolved over the years. I've seen it. I've been a lawyer for 32 years now. I have seen this happen. The answer changes. So in
mhm.
California, in counties, in other states. So again, you want to make sure that someone's not laying claim to your property and who's selling it to you really is, and that someone else doesn't have a claim to your property, even if it's minimal. Say you have a creek on your property or part of a river. Maybe people get to cross over periodically, or they've been doing it for years. Is there anything like that? But if there's an easement recorded, you're going to see it and it's going to come up. Normal ones you'd expect are utilities and water and, internet, the cables and things like that. So you may see, depending on where you live, your local power company has power lines near there, or the water, the water district, the district has water that gets pumped through, and there's pipes underneath, and they're going to go under your property. But you need to know that too, and you should know that, one, so it's there, so sure your reference, and two, so if you plan on building over there, I can guarantee you that the district is not going to let you build a shed over on top of their power on their water pipes. They're not, because you're going to break ground and you're going to break the pipes, and the weight is going to go in. That's going to be a problem, or there could be flooding. So you need to know what you're buying. When you're purchasing a home, the seller is supposed to disclose everything. A history of lawsuits. Okay. If you've been sued and you're aware of any lawsuits on the property, you should know what they were. I would also recommend that you do, as a buyer, some due diligence to search, because that may be telling. Were they fighting over title? Were they fighting over use of the property? Where they fight, is there a neighbor who is crazy, which we will get to crazy neighbors in a bit. But you don't always have control over this. Does your neighbor, those are questions you need to ask. Maybe there was a fight over some errors. Is there a crazy heir that's coming over going, you've got mama's house and I want it? People get very emotionally attached to residents. Right or wrong, there are emotional attachments that come to certain things. A residence is one of them. So be careful. Two, make sure there's no fights with family or anything like that, or business partners over investment, because I've seen it happen. People you think you're on the same page and they have wildly different views on it. They can lead to very acrimonious fighting, a lot of heartbreak, and maybe it would have happened. I tend to think these fights among families and friends, a lot of them, there was something brewing before. And this may have brought it to the surface. Not always, but this can be a catalyst for it. Make sure you're not stepping into something like that. Ask about your neighbors. Walk around, even if it's not disclosed. Do you have a neighbor who's drunk and playing loud music all the time? Do you have a neighbor who's renting properties a lot? Because that's going to mean a lot of turnover, and then maybe different tenants and things like that. Do you have a domestic violence situation next door? Do you have neighbors that own guns and are willing to use them? A lot of people own guns and you never know it, and that's illegal to do. But if you have people who are constantly fighting in front of your house, throwing trash everywhere, and are not really people you want to be living near, this will be a nightmare for you if you're living next to them, because you will become the problem. Are they, how is the walkway between your homes? And I know this sounds funny, but I've seen it happen. Walkways between homes can be very sensitive areas, particularly if they're close together, because maybe someone's walking by your bathroom window all the time, and you're in the shower, and they used to do it all the time. And, that's how they like to do things, or that's how they put their trash cans. What is the daily life like? And do they know about this? Because I can tell you, when you tell someone to stop doing something and they feel entitled, some people say, oh my God, I'm sorry, hey, it won't happen again. Let us know if the kids are too loud, whatever it is. Other people don't care, and they can sue you, they can become aggressive, they can make your life miserable, and they can become very dangerous. So if there is a history of fighting with your neighbor, make sure that you do. Make sure that you have an accurate survey of your property. And make sure that it's recorded with the county, because make sure you know where that property line is and you can see it before you buy the property. Because guess what? If your neighbor Joe has a fence over your property and it's been there for 20 years, you may not own that property anymore and they not have it to sell. I've seen fights about this. The trees are over here, the things are over here. Make sure that you have a survey that's been recorded and you know where the property line is. Don't just look at the survey and say, okay, it looks right. Where is the line? Sometimes it's marked, but you're not going to be able to tell. These are professional people. They know what they're doing and they conduct the survey. They're not going to be spray painted in a residential area. Maybe there are markers. Maybe there are things like a tag or something, or a stake, or make sure it's not going to move. Make sure you really know where your property is. Because if someone's shed has been there for 30 years, you don't own that anymore. You probably don't. It's called adverse possession. Someone's used it for openly, continuously for a period of time. And the owner goes, oh yeah, I saw that. I forgot about it. It may not be theirs to sell, at least that part of the property. And you're going to find out the hard way when you get into a fight with the neighbor. Do your neighbors have trees? Okay, so again, I see this a lot. There's a couple things. There's the overhang where the stuff is hanging over in your yard. You're talking foliage, or God forbid, rats. We see this, there's a lot of foliage and things. That will happen.
Problem at my house.
They have super highways there. If you have a lot of ivy and things like that, that's where they hang out. Rodents, mice, rats, things like that, and they burrow. And I've seen this. So if you have a tree, guess what's going to cause damage to your foundation? The roots, or the tree falls, obviously, or branch. But if it's on your property and hanging over there, you need to figure out what that deal is. If it's on your property and close enough to your foundation, you need to figure out what kind of tree that is, or if it needs to be removed, because the roots, once they come under, will cause damage to you. Is it disclosed? Not always. I have seen people who've almost come to physical fighting over tree droppings in their yard. They get very, very angry. The law is that the overhang can be trimmed and cut that way. So again, It may look very pretty to have all these trees and all these things, but if you're dumping on your neighbor or they're dumping on you or the roots are causing problems or there are rats or other rodents, usually rats, that's usually what it is. Rabbits are cute, I know, deer once in a while, but these can become real nuisances. There are laws about that. So you need to make sure, do you want your yard fenced? Is it fenced? Is it advisable? Is that something that maybe you should negotiate within this? Those are as to the exterior. I always recommend if you're going to spend the money to buy any kind of property, you have a contractor you feel comfortable working with. A good contractor will come in, you'll pay them and say, or look, or find someone, get a recommendation. There are so many good contractors in the state of California. CSLB.org, Contractor State Licensing Board.org. When you interview these people, get their license number. You should be able to look that license number up to have it verified that they are in fact a licensed contractor. If they don't,
License, and I think it shows whether they've had complaints against them or not too
it
on there.
does, and if they have a bond, and if they've been suspended, and things like that. Having a few complaints is not necessarily about. I mean, it happens. You could have had a bad client. As you know, you're a realtor. I'm a lawyer. These things happen. Not
Oh,
every
yeah.
not everybody's going to like you, and sometimes, as Linda and I both know, we have to be the bearers of bad news because in our professional things, say, "I'm sorry, we can't do that," and this is the law, and this is how this goes. So that can prompt a complaint, even if you haven't done anything wrong, and an investigation. But if they have too many, that might be something to look at. It'll show they have insurance. It'll show they have a bond in case they do anything. But in your case, that's just to make sure they're
I think
legit.
it's kind of like our reviews. We get some that are mediocre and maybe the transaction didn't quite go their way and they're not, hey, we got through it, but maybe they whatever didn't like
They
maybe
want,
their sales price,
yeah,
but that's all they were offering. So you,
they
you had
want
a
to
choice whether to take it or not.
they want to blame someone. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's the lawyer. Well, let's call it for what it is. Lawyers, a lot of people don't like lawyers. A lot of lawyers get blamed. A lot of contractors and hardworking, a lot of teachers get
Yeah.
blamed. A lot of police officers get blamed, and it's not appropriate. It happens. It's not
So it's
always.
just kind of one of those things where they got to read, see what it is, see if it's, I mean, if you're that type of personality, they're probably not the contractor for you.
Yeah, exactly. Meet them, talk to them, make sure you get along with them because you may be working with them later. Have them
Mhm.
come through your home and say, give them the background of the home, depending on what's by. Older homes tend to have more problems. The older the
Yeah.
home, maybe things like pipes, electrical panels, you don't know and also they're going to tell you, unless I open up the walls, I'm not going to know everything. It's one of the first things they're
Right.
going to tell you.
That's why the home inspections are so important. It doesn't guarantee that that home's going to go uh, unmaintained for several years. It just means at that moment when they looked at it, everything was working. But
Exactly,
they can't
exactly,
tell when things have been replaced or updated or upgraded or the
exactly.
plumbing
And
underneath.
if there's been a history of remodels, you need to know that, but to give the contractor all the information. Don't just rely on the disclosures. Hire them. They're not expensive. I mean, they're not free, but they're not expensive. You can go
Mhm.
in, you can have these people and it's worth your time and money to you. And again, the contractor may miss something. I mean, look, there are things like setbacks off the road. Is that right? Does it look structurally sound? How does the roof look? And they may say, look, until I do some testing, I don't know, but there may be an issue here. And that may be
Or it's
something,
maybe obvious. They look at it and say, hey, you're got shingles missing, or that's
yeah,
kind of an
yeah,
obvious.
right.
There's probably something wrong. You
Yeah, or
might
there's
want to have
sloping here.
a professional roofer come out and inspect it,
Right, or
They'll
there's a
give you a
gap between
recommendation.
there's a problem with your foundation. There's a gap between some of the cement on the walkway in the back. They may they're professionals. They're trained to and have experience in this area. They may be able to notice some things. It may be part of a bigger problem. It may not be. You need to be addressed that. If you find this is just the outside and the inside, just looking at these things. So I've had people buy homes and like, my home is sloping. I didn't realize when I walked in, but it's literally sloping. You've got a foundational problem there. You do. Almost
But
certain.
their eyes are trained to see that when they walk up.
Right.
Ours aren't. I
Yeah.
mean, I catch a lot of it just because I've been a realtor for so long, but
But you have a lot
I
of
I
experience.
am not a foundation expert.
Right,
So
exactly. And there's electrical and there's the HVAC system. And he may tell you, did you check the heating and HVAC system? Let me take a look at there's certain contractors, but a general contractor can give you some ideas. Get a general contractor, preferably, and if there's more that they recommend. But this way you know what you're looking at. And if you find problems, there's a few things. You should get an estimate from the contractor to say, look, there's a problem with this. This is what I think it'll take to correct it. I'm not going to know until I do that. You can negotiate one, you may want to pass on the property. Two, you can negotiate a seller's credit and get a reduction in the sales price. You're saying, look, I'm going to have to pay to do this now. And because it's not in tip top shape, not most houses aren't. Look, at some point or another, all residences need to have upgrades, not just the flowers and not just the fence put up. If you don't do that, your home is going to have, you're going to have a lot of trouble. You really are. And it's going to happen. And whether people like to think that or not, let's just leave it and hope for the best. Okay. And that may work for a long time. But I've seen places like this and it doesn't, if you just leave it, it's not going to get better. But you need a realistic assessment of what this is going to be, how much it's going to cost, and when do you want the property market. Don't rely on the seller. Like the seller has a duty to disclose all known defects.
They have their due diligence, and to be quite honest, our boilerplate disclosures, and this is what I tell my clients, I can't touch them. Everything's from you, and I fully expect you to tell the truth. I mean, you don't have to necessarily spin it into a 3-page report on, oh my goodness, we had a plumbing break. All you need to do is tell them that your water pipes broke and you had insurance come in and clean it up. I mean, with licensed contractors. I mean, you don't have to, but it comes from the seller. So they lived in the property. It's up to them to tell the truth and pass on information to buyers that are going to be taking over this property so they can assess whether it's going to be work for them or not. And they're going
right,
to be able to pass it on to the next one. So
exactly, but I even with those, and that's good advice from Linda. I do recommend you have your own contractor because
mhm.
you may say, "Look, it looks good to me." To know if anything's worse, I'd have to tear open the walls. I'm not going to do that. But I would also ask the seller, say, have there been any problems with plumbing or electrical or
Mhm.
mold? Those are the main ones you're going to find behind wall. Any kind of
Well,
structure.
and I always have them sign off if they don't want to have one. If you don't want to have a home inspection and you don't want to have a pest inspection, you're signing that off that you
You say,
waived it.
yeah,
You
I
waived your right.
understand. I had that opportunity and I didn't do it. But if there's a problem with the property, it's usually on the seller. If there's any indication that there's been a problem in the past and they were notified of it, whether they not they blew it off, like
Hmm.
if say the foundation is slipping, and I see this on houses on hills. Look, if you buy a house on a hill, it may sound great, but if you're on a hill, you're on a hill.
Hmm.
Okay, if you're on a hill, soil moves, foundation doesn't stay the way it is. It's the being on the hill is putting a strain on that. The hill can go. Did this happen? How often you've seen those houses in like Malibu and places like that, or
Hmm.
anywhere? I think
You're
places.
sitting in your neighbor's yard down there.
Yeah, exactly. And so and you can be sued for it. So again, I'm not saying it would happen, but those are some examples of things I've seen some throughout the Bay Area too, where this, the person's up there and then all of a sudden the backyard's in the neighbor's yard, things like that. And rain, things you don't, mud, you don't have, those poor people in Santa Barbara, you don't have a guarantee. And those were what supposedly rock solid homes in expensive areas where you think of
Hmm.
Pacific Palisades essentially burned to the ground in some areas where people thought that would never happen. Are you near a canyon, by the way? Is there any fire risks? You might want to look at that and what if you can get insurance.
Hmm.
That's not so much disclosures, but if you're near a
Well,
canyon,
actually, we do. And if they're up in our country areas, because we have a few still out here in the Central Valley where we're at by Fresno, but they actually have to have it signed off by the fire inspector and they have to go out and inspect, make sure that, right, they kept the debris away from the house or whatever their guidelines is in code. So basically, a fire inspection, right? So, yes, those are added to all our
I had a property for a while.
fire endangered properties.
Right, exactly. And there are some properties, like on property in the mountains, and we're required to, we use the same person every year. Everybody gets the notice from the county. Your weeds are too long, your grass is too long. I don't know if they are not, so I'm not up there enough. They come and they trim them twice a year. They're required to because of the fires and things like that and what you can do to
Mhm.
reduce. I would also, any information you can get is good information. But again, also when you're doing your disclosures as a buyer, I would look around and make sure there aren't any kind of cover-ups or touch-ups like odors. perfume, things like that. Sometimes they can be trying to cover up a problem, and they know the cost of litigation here. Okay, so in your agreement, there's a thing, if you ever do get into a dispute, you have to mediate first before you file suit. But you're gonna have to pay a lawyer to do that unless you can get them taken on contingency, and most won't. Lawyers are business people, the good ones anyway. They know that. And you need to look at, like, what is your downside? You really need to look seriously at it. We've all seen in the state of California and other states where these disasters do happen and affect residents, and you can be displaced for a long period of time. How is this? And I know there is this rush. Everybody's got to buy a home. Oh my God, you're not going to be able to get to the market, and there's that panic. I wouldn't get sucked into that. I think if you think this home isn't for you, you have too many concerns. It's okay to say no. Most people will have other opportunities. No one's going to die. Go for the.
Definitely. If the buyer has a skittish moment or too many, like you just said, too many uncertainties, I definitely don't recommend they complete the transaction, because there are other homes out there. You know, but if it matches a lot of the check boxes on what it was you was wanting, and whatever the issue is that's concerning you, you can live with, right? If Because keep in mind they don't always go away, then that's probably your house. So
Right.
it just
I would
just
also,
depends.
right, check the appliances if they're coming. Check the stove. Check the back of the stove. Make sure it's working. Okay, because I've seen these things that are like rusted out, in the back, and you want to check. Pull out the fridge. Take a look behind it. Okay, those little things. It doesn't seem like anything. Check the pipes behind sinks, that area, and have someone look in there. I know it seems pretty fundamental, but underneath sinks, behind in bathroom sinks, behind the toilet, make sure that you're checking those, because you can see things and people might just be painting over it to show it, things like that. I would really, if there's a basement or underneath a crawl space underneath your home, I would really get it looked at. I would have a contractor go into there, because that's where I find a lot of problems are, where the wood's been eaten away and there's nothing left there. And then,
Hmm.
it's been sitting, it's an older house, right? And it may sound fun. Older the house, the more the problems. Don't get involved in a passion project unless you really want to fund it, because it could turn into a money pit. Don't fall in love with the money pit. There's the romance of fixing up your own home and building it with your own hands. And if you have the skill sets and the money to do that, that's fine. But you could really be taking on a lot of financial strain if you don't. It doesn't mean all residences are like that, but you need to be realistic, and you shouldn't be just looking now. You should be looking 10, 15, 20 years from now about what this house is
Hmm.
going to be. Because it may be fine now, but is it going to be fine later?
Well, give us a quick timeline on what you've seen, or you probably know the law on when they turn that in to you, right? I mean, what is kind of the deadline for when they find things that was not disclosed to them that they get over to you?
Well, for breach of an oral contract, it's 2 years. So if it's an oral agreement, shake, don't ever do those. Let's buy it. Let's do this, and there are representations. It's 2 years. It is 2 years for negligence, 3 years for fraud, and it is also 4 years on breach of a written agreement. So if people were telling you things, by the way, don't buy into this. If there's something on the disclosure and say, hey, this looks rusted out here. What's going on here in the pipes? Oh, don't worry about that. We just put this little thing here, but it's fine. We got it looked at. That's an oral representation. Make sure it's in writing so you can sue, because it's a lot harder to say, well, they told you that, but this is what's in writing. A lot of people don't realize all those questions going back and forth in texts and writing and emails may not be a deal. It's like, tell people what this was insurance too. Oh, the broker told me this, that I'm covered. Well, your policy doesn't say that, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what they're going to go with. So I think they come to us at any varying stages, because sometimes they know right away.
Mm-hmm.
They go, I've been snookered. Sometimes 2 years later, they're like, the water is flooding into my basement every time it rains, and I'm having to bail. It's causing all this damage because it's going through here. And it happens every year. And my neighbors have told me this happened every. No one told me that the basement flooded. Is it a defect? No, but it's a problem. I had no idea. What kind of damage does it cause? Okay. How much is it going to cost to replace this? What is that really worth to me? Those are when they come to me. And again,
Mhm.
there is a provision in the CAR, California Association of Realtors contract agreement that says you have to request mediation before you sue to be eligible for legal fees. I recommend you do that. I would also recommend that you get the name, address, and contact information of the sellers and same the buyers, because I've had this happen. Well, I don't know. I think I know the agent, and I can guarantee you, and this is not in any way intended to be disparaging on Linda or anybody other broker. And I have friends who are brokers and represent them too, and agents. They don't want to get involved in your lawsuit. They don't want to be the go-between on this because you know
Mhm.
what's going to happen? Poor Linda is going to get all these calls from the people saying, "How come there's this and this? And why didn't you tell me?" And Linda say, "Look, I'm not responsible for that," which is the law. But
I didn't live there. I don't know.
yeah, exactly. But Linda, so get that information if they,
Mhm.
and it's sometimes a good idea to say, "Could I have your information in case I have any questions?" Don't pester the seller, okay? Because I've had some people are calling all the time. There's a rooster. I had a case I just settled recently where the guy kept calling because he couldn't find a key to something. He couldn't find the rooster. I mean, it was like he was treating the guy like a landlord, essentially. And they were very nice about it. They're in real estate, but it might be a good idea to find out who these people are selling to you. Sometimes their names are there and you know where they're going or an email say, hey,
Right.
good. And if you can get their information, that's a good idea to have that on hand because otherwise we get to track them down. But
Mhm.
again, if you see anything funny in the house, have the ceilings checked, have the walls checked. Look,
Yeah, those disclosures are so important.
they
That
are.
is really California's kind of disclosure happy compared to some of the other states, but it's because they want to resolve some of the issues ahead of time, instead of in the courtroom and different things.
I
So,
agree, and I think California has a lot of disclosure, but I think they're pretty fair. No system's perfect. If I have a system like that, some people are going to use and abuse it. Some people are going to play fair. I mean, it's just how it goes. But
yeah.
I do think that California does a lot more than a lot of other states to ensure that you understand what you're buying. It's no longer a caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. You used to have this thing. You say,
Hmm.
you bought it. I don't care. I don't know that. That's why they have lemon laws. You guys know about those for cars?
Yeah.
I don't know. You bought it. And yeah, but it's a piece of junk. I mean, it doesn't run. I'm like, well, that's your problem. You should have thought of that before. That's not the deal here anymore. So it's intended to protect against it. So if you're selling, make a list. Maybe before you sell, you want to get a contractor in. Okay,
Hmm.
maybe you want to have that contract and say, what are the potential problems here? What may be a problem? It's
Do
better
your
to,
due diligence.
yeah,
That's the important key there.
yeah,
Why
but
don't you
book,
give us some contact information and maybe there's some out there that are in that predicament, they can give you a call.
sure. I'm Hillary Trial Lawyers, S on the Trial Lawyers, two L's in Hillary. My telephone number is 310-492-4009. You want to buy a house in the Central Valley, call Linda.
Thank you. Everybody, this is Realtor Linda Peltz. My license number 01997670. I will catch you on the next one.